This is your tech moment for May 28th, 2019. Links for this and all of today's stories can be found on the blog at medium.com. First up from Engadget, Colorado college students were secretly used to train facial recognition. Researchers used over 1,700 photos of students and others without their permission for a facial recognition study sponsored by U.S. military and intelligence services, according to the Colorado Springs Independent and Financial Times. While technically legal, it has raised questions about privacy around facial recognition tech, especially considering how the photos might end up being used. Quote, "This is essentially normalizing peeping Tom culture," end quote. The Electronic Frontier Foundation's David Moss told CSND. The study, carried out in 2012 and 2013, was made to determine, in part, if algorithms could identify facial features from a long distance away through obstacles and in poor light. A telephoto camera was set up at a distance of about 150 meters away from a public area with a lot of foot traffic. Most of the subjects were looking away from the camera, and with many looking at their phones. Your headlines from DSL Reports Tuesday morning links. Here are the most congested wireless networks in the United States. It comes from lightreading.com. Huawei fight as a threat to rural internet, says seattletimes.com. Democrats and GOP might negotiate over a less strict version of net neutrality. That from phonearena.com. A look at AT&T's grand vision of transforming into a modern media company spanning multiple content networks, distribution channels, and customer data streams. That story from fortune.com. Senate bill targets national broadband map problems. U.S. Telecom hopes to have recommendations by Q3 from telecompetitor.com. Comcast takes Xfinity On Demand off TiVo. That story's at multichannel.com, as well as Hulu virtual pay TV service is now the second biggest with 2 million subscribers. Weighing the merger of Sprint and T-Mobile, that story over at WashingtonTimes.com. SpaceX Starlink satellites create a celestial dot-to-dot. That story's at slashgear.com. United States considers 25% tariff on game consoles. That story is at gamesindustry.biz. Julia Sowles at hackercombat.com writes, U.S. Navy to build $350 billion record social media archive. The U.S. Navy proposes to come up with a global social media archive of a totally unprecedented scale. The social media archive that the U.S. Navy researchers plan to create would comprise of 350 billion digital data records and would be part of the ongoing research efforts conducted through the Department of Defense and Analysis at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey. Julia Sowles at hackercombat.com writes, U.S. Navy to build 350 billion record social media archive. The U.S. Navy proposes to come up with a social media archive of a totally unprecedented scale. The social media archive that the U.S. Navy researchers plan to create would comprise of 350 billion digital data records and would be part of the ongoing research efforts conducted through the Department of Defense and Analysis at the Naval Postgraduate School, Monterey, California. The research project's synopsis states, quote, "This project is part of ongoing research efforts conducted through the Department of Defense and Analysis at the Naval Postgraduate School. Our research aims to provide enhanced understanding of fundamental social dynamics, to model the evolution of linguistic communities and emerging modes of collective expression over time and across countries," end quote. The synopsis further explains, as a central requirement for this research, we seek to acquire a large-scale global historical archive of social media data, providing the full text of all public social media posts across all countries and languages covered by the social media platform. It also clarified that the aim is to use the research to advance knowledge through scientific publications and to use the data in the classroom. Students would thus get new opportunities for thesis research and for developing an analytical skills as well. The intention is to go through social media records spanning a period of 2.5 years, from July 1st, 2014 to December 31st, 2016. The data would be collected from a single social media platform and would comprise all publicly available messages, comments, or posts transmitted on the platform over the specified time period. From Charlie Osborne at ZDNet's Zero Day, CrowdStrike NSS Labs resolve court battle over product testing. CrowdStrike and NSS Labs have settled a legal dispute over tests relating to CrowdStrike Falcon endpoint protection solution. In a statement, CrowdStrike said, CrowdStrike and NSS Labs have resolved the lawsuits between them pursuant to a confidential settlement agreement. As part of that settlement, NSS issued a corrective statement concerning the firm's past analysis of the CrowdStrike Falcon, tested by the cybersecurity guidance company both privately and publicly. Originally, NSS included the product in its first Advanced Endpoint Protection Test Reports and Security Value Map, published in February of 2017. The antivirus and security solutions of 13 vendors were analyzed, including Carbon Black, ESET, Malwarebytes, SentinelOne, and CrowdStrike. In total, 9 were recommended, while 1 was security recommended, 1 was deemed neutral, and 2 were given a caution rating. CrowdStrike's Falcon was one of 2 products given a value estimate of below average, with an overall effectiveness rating of 73.2% and a score of 99% for evasion techniques. While NSS said the report was in the public domain to provide transparency and help enterprises understand the factors behind the results, CrowdStrike disputed the results. Carl Bode over at TechDirt writes, report says EU ISPs are happily ignoring net neutrality rules. A few years ago, the European Union passed some fairly decent net neutrality rules that went notably further than the FCC's 2015 rules we just discarded here in the States. They not only prohibited ISPs from unjustly blocking, throttling, or restricting access to services the ISP may compete with, they imposed some basic protections governing zero rating, a practice ISPs here in the US have increasingly been using anti-competitively. The problem for the EU is that after the European Union's body of European regulators of electronic communications crafted the guidelines, it was up to individual countries to interpret and enforce them, something that apparently hasn't been going all that well. According to a new coalition of 45 academics, nonprofits, and private companies, European ISPs are routinely tap dancing around the restrictions. Under current rules, European ISPs are allowed to inspect and shape traffic using Deep Packet Inspection, DPI, tech, but only if it's to optimize the network. They can't use DPI to track user activity for money-making purposes. But the group says in a letter to European authorities, they're doing so anyway in violation of the rules. Quote, IaaS providers are increasingly using DPI technology for the purpose of tracking of traffic management and the differentiated pricing of specific applications or services, zero rating, as part of their product design. DPI allows IaaS providers to identify and distinguish traffic in their networks in order to identify traffic of specific applications or services for the purpose such as billing them differently, throttling, or prioritizing them over other traffic. Here in the States, ISPs routinely use deep packet inspection to track your online browsing behavior, often down to the millisecond, then monetize that data. In some instances, ISPs like AT&T have actually tried to charge consumers extra if they want to opt out of such surveillance. And while DPI can be used to single out and manage specific types of traffic, actually confirming whether an ISP is using PPI for commercial tracking purposes requires some diligence on the part of regulators. It's a diligence that's lacking in most countries, the coalition notes, quote. The nature of DPI necessitates telecom expertise, as well as expertise in data protection issues, yet we observe a lack of cooperation between national regulatory authorities for electronic communications and regulatory authorities for data protection on this issue, both in the decisions put forward on these products, as well as cooperation on joint opinions on the questions in general. Granted, ISPs have always tried to hide behind ambiguous claims of congestion to justify anti-competitive behavior. At the same time, ISPs have also increasingly used such technologies to erect arbitrary barriers, letting them charge users specifically by types of usage, opening doors to ISPs that have tried to charge users more money if they'd like to actually use video, gaming, or streaming services without them being throttled by default. It's what lets Verizon sell unlimited data plans that ban 4K video and throttle HD video unless you're willing to shell out yet more money. The coalition notes that at least 186 EU ISPs are now ignoring the net neutrality restrictions without penalty, highlighting how net neutrality rules don't mean much if regulators aren't willing to enforce them. And while some might argue that none of this matters, letting ISPs dictate which traffic reaches you based on how much you're willing to pay is a fairly ugly precedent it shouldn't be too difficult to see the longer-term issues with, especially when there's neither healthy competition nor balanced regulatory oversight in place to rein in ISPs' worst impulses. Wanted to let you know about Sophos Tuesday Review. They have 21 hot stories of prior week. Links are available on the blog. You can get updates all day long by following me on Twitter at WEYM0. Subscribe to the Alexa skill or find me on YouTube. Have a great day.